Buddhism for Today, The Essential Wisdom of the Threefold Lotus Sutra by Nikkyo Niwano. Part 2, The Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wondrous Dharma. Chapter 19, The Merits of the Teachers of the Dharma. Whereas the previous chapter explained the merits of someone who has just entered the path of practicing the Lotus Sutra, this chapter describes the merits of a person who has progressed a step further, to become a teacher of the Dharma. Being a teacher of the Dharma is not limited to monks and nuns. Anyone who receives the teachings of the Buddha in faith, upholds them through practice, and strives to share them with others, qualifies as a teacher of the Dharma. As discussed in Chapter 10, the practices that the teacher of the Dharma undertakes, otherwise known as the 5 practices of Dharma teachers, are 1. Receiving and embracing, 2. Reading, 3. Reciting, 4. Expounding, and 5. Copying the Lotus Sutra. A close examination of each of these 5 practices shows the steps in the process through which our faith gradually deepens. To begin with, if the teaching of the Lotus Sutra makes perfect sense to us when we hear it, we have attained what the sutra calls a moment of faith and understanding. If we also rejoice in the teaching, appreciating it with gratitude, we will be able to maintain that faith and understanding in the Lotus Sutra. The next step is reading the sutra carefully and reciting it in order to inscribe it on our hearts through memorization. Until this stage, we practice primarily for the benefit of ourselves, but we can think of this as a spiritual discipline for the purpose of firmly establishing our own foundation in the faith. Once our faith has progressed to this point, our hearts are naturally filled with an irrepressible desire to share the teachings with others, and out of this feeling develop the practices of expounding the sutra, sharing the sutra with others by explaining it for them, and copying, which includes reproducing the sutra by hand, as well as spreading the teachings through textual means. Traversing each of these 5 stages is synonymous with the path of true faith. Here at the outset, Shakyamuni Buddha begins by explaining to the Bodhisattva ever diligent the merits received by people who have reached this level of faith. Anyone who performs these 5 practices of Dharma teachers will receive 800 merits of the eye, 1200 merits of the ear, 800 merits of the nose, 1200 merits of the tongue, 800 merits of the body, and 1200 merits of the mind. These merits will exquisitely purify the functioning of their 6 sense faculties. These 6 include the ordinary perceptual organs of the 5 senses, the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body, with the addition of the mind, cognition. We need not concern ourselves with the numerical figures of 800, 1200, and so forth, because their purpose is to symbolically express the perfectly complete attainment of each of these merits. The merits of the eye. Just what kinds of merits of the eye do teachers of the Dharma receive? In the text of the sutra, Shakyamuni Buddha explains them as follows. Those good sons and good daughters, having purified the ordinary eyes received at birth from their parents, will see all the mountains, forests, rivers, and seas of the inner and outer reaches of the 3,000 great thousandfold world, from the depths of Avicii hell to the heights of the summit of all existence. Furthermore, they will also see all the living beings therein, seeing and knowing every place in which their rebirths will occur as a result of their karmic causes. In this passage, the Buddha explains that if one's practice of the faith has progressed to this level, the physical eyes that one was born with, the eyes bequeathed from one's parents, will become pure, without any trace of the clouds of delusion, allowing one to clearly discern the true state of all things in the threefold world, from the depths of Avicii hell to the summit of all existence, the highest heaven in the realm of form. And not only is one able to see the beings of the threefold world, living their lives as clearly as if they were in the palm of one's hand, one can also perceive everything about them, including the causes of their future lives, and the places where they will be reborn as a result. Near the end of the section of the verse that concludes this portion of the chapter, we read the line, even without attaining the eye of a heavenly being. This is an opposite way of saying, the ordinary eyes received at birth from their parents, meaning that even though someone does not have the actual eyes of a heavenly being that can discern the true state of all things, they will be able to do so even while living in the Saha world, because as described above, clouds of delusion simply no longer obscure their eyes. Simply speaking, because their minds have become completely tranquil and pure, and are devoid of the petty sense of self, preconceptions and subjective perspectives do not distort the true state of all phenomena that is reflected in their eyes. They see the true shape of things because their minds always remain calm, no longer awash in the rough waves of intense emotion. In another sutra, the Buddha explains, "Nothing is properly reflected in water boiling over a fire, nor does the surface of a lake obscured by water weeds reflect things in their reality. Neither can windswept, choppy waters reflect things as they are." The Buddha teaches us that until we have freed ourselves from the delusions of self-centeredness and the stirrings of excessive passion, we cannot see the ultimate reality of things. This is how I think we should interpret the merits of the eye that the Buddha enumerates in this passage. The 4 kinds of fearlessness of bodhisattvas. At the beginning of this passage of verse, the Buddha urges those present, "All of you, listen to the merits of those in the midst of a great multitude who have fearless minds and teach this Dharma Flower Sutra." The words, fearless minds, mean just what they say, that people possessing such minds share what they believe with confidence, fearing nothing, and without hesitation. Traditionally, the concept of the 4 kinds of fearlessness of bodhisattvas has been used to describe this attitude in detail. One can teach the Dharma fearlessly if one keeps in mind the 4 points that follow. Perfect memory without omission. The first of the 4 kinds of fearlessness is perfect memory without omission. Bodhisattvas teach the Dharma with fearlessness by remembering all they have learned, without failing to recall anything. They have no apprehension or uncertainty in teaching the Dharma, because they have completely memorized all the teachings they have heard. Doing so sounds simple enough, but it is not so easy to accomplish. To retain all without forgetting, bodhisattvas must sit down and listen to the teachings with their hearts whenever they hear them, and if they have doubts or are unsure of anything, they do not hesitate to follow up by asking questions until they have understood it to their satisfaction. Bodhisattvas also inscribe the teachings both within their heads and on their hearts, by reading and reciting the sutra in the mornings and evenings, day in and day out. Bodhisattvas cannot reach this level unless they persevere in such tireless efforts. Complete knowledge of all Dharma medicines. The second of the 4 kinds of fearlessness is complete knowledge of all Dharma medicines. Bodhisattvas are fearless in teaching the Dharma because they know all the Dharma's medicines, as well as the capacities, desires, natures, and minds of all living beings. Just as a doctor changes a medical prescription according to the type and severity of a person's illness, those who know all the prescriptions of the teachings can, without anxiety, tailor their teaching appropriately according to the differences in people's capacities to understand, their desires, natures, and feelings. This is all to say that those who are worthy of being called bodhisattvas should not just have memorized all the teachings well, but should also have cultivated their own ability to teach the Dharma with a mastery of skillful means. Skill in discussing the teachings appropriately. The third kind of fearlessness is skill in discussing the teachings appropriately. Bodhisattvas are fearless in teaching the Dharma because of their ability to engage in dialogue with people about the teaching and respond to their questions appropriately. Discuss literally means answering questions and responding to objections. If teaching the Dharma were simply a one-time presentation, cramming beforehand might make for sufficient preparation, and anyone who has a basic knowledge of the teachings would be capable of doing so. True teachers of the Dharma, however, must be able to respond with clear answers to questions about what they teach, and have the capacity to respond logically to objections. Their responses must not be deceptive, or forced interpretations that stretch the truth. They must be in accord with the Buddha's teachings. The word appropriately here indicates this requirement. In other words, when the content of the response is appropriate, the answer is right, which is to say that it is in accord with the teaching of the Buddha. Furthermore, even if the teacher's answers are right, they cannot be considered good teachers of the Dharma unless they know how to make themselves easily understood and are capable of explaining the Dharma in ways that help others fully awaken to their own misconceptions. Skill refers to this eloquence that the Dharma teacher must possess. In short, anyone who can answer every question sensibly and respond clearly to any objection in accord with the teachings of the Buddha, as well as to the satisfaction of the listener, will expound the Dharma with fearless courage. Ability to resolve doubts. The fourth kind of fearlessness is the ability to resolve doubts. This means teaching the Dharma fearlessly through the ability to resolve people's doubts about the teachings of the Buddha. Many questions arise when interpreting the teachings of Buddhism, because of the profound depth and vast breadth of the teachings. Interpretations of the Dharma are so numerous that it has traditionally been said, "So many monks, so many interpretations." Making any categorical conclusions about the Buddha's teachings requires a sharp intellect, but ultimately, a person must be unexcelled in virtue and have the utmost compassion. Virtue and compassion are necessary because when evaluating such difficult problems as differing interpretations of the teachings, one cannot grasp the true intention of the Buddha through intellectual understanding alone. Only someone who has attained a personal and direct realization of the Buddha's great compassion can conclusively determine the Buddha's true intent. A bodhisattva who can successfully resolve such doubts in this way will be able to expound the Dharma fearlessly. After learning the 4 kinds of fearlessness of bodhisattvas, some people may become unnerved by the thought of expounding the Dharma to others. But we should not be intimidated. These 4 categories portray the ideal of the consummate teacher of the Dharma. To attain this level of faith is indeed to become a great bodhisattva. Nobody is a great bodhisattva from the very beginning. One can reach this level only after prolonged and extensive practice of spiritual discipline. Those who train in bodhisattva practice learn to expound the Dharma while keeping in mind these 4 ideals, taking them as 4 guidelines for the frame of mind they should have. If we run into a difficult problem or face a question that is too much for us to handle, we should frankly say, "This question is beyond my ability, so I will ask a knowledgeable person to explain it to me, and then get back to you at a later date." We mustn't irresponsibly come up with an answer to bluff our way through the situation. Honestly saying, "I am not sure," does not lower the credibility of the person explaining the Dharma, but actually earns the trust of others. The merits of the ear. The Buddha next explains the merits of the purification of the remaining sense faculties, beginning with the ear. He teaches that those who have progressed in the 5 practices of Dharma teachers will be able to distinguish every kind of sound and voice, owing to the purification of their natural ears. Every kind of sound and voice refers to the vibrations all things make in the air whenever they move or speak. Dharma teachers whose minds have become absolutely tranquil through the deepening of their faith can clearly grasp by their sounds the subtle workings of things. Among the various types of sounds mentioned in this passage, those of fire, water, and wind represent the sounds of natures. With their purified ears, Dharma teachers can discern a clear picture of the workings of nature just by listening to the crackling fire, babbling brook, or whistling wind. Practically speaking, this means that when they hear the gentle sounds of nature, they are able to delight in them as if they were listening to beautiful music, and when they hear an unusual sound in nature, they are highly sensitive to its causes. Because of this sensitivity, Dharma teachers can save themselves and many other people from the dangers of natural disasters, such as blizzards, typhoons or hurricanes, tsunamis, and floods. Dharma teachers can even discern the workings of people's minds from the sounds of the musical instruments they play, such as the conch shells, horns, drums, and bells mentioned in the sutra. Upon entering a factory, all a seasoned mechanical engineer has to do is listen to the sounds its machines make to know which equipment is malfunctioning, which mechanisms have worn out parts, and which components are the problem. In like manner, an outstanding conductor can ascertain who among more than 100 musicians performing in a symphony orchestra has too low or too high a pitch, is not creating the right mood, or is overperforming. So there is all the more reason that the teacher of the Dharma, an engineer in the art of life, and a guide for living beings, undoubtedly understands the feelings of living beings from their words or other sounds. The sounds of living beings are generated by their physical movements, not just by the vibrations of their vocal cords, but also by the mental movements of their emotions and will. When the movements of our emotions become intense, we make sounds of joy, sadness, or suffering, and we produce speech, sounds we make when we want to communicate our will to others. The songs of birds and the cries of animals are roughly the same type of sound. One who has attained deep faith can make out the true meaning of these sounds, the screams of extreme suffering coming from living beings who have the angry mindset of the hells, the whimper of beings with the ignorant mindset of the realm of beasts, who are tortured by all sorts of distress, the moans of hunger from those with the insatiable mindset of the hungry spirits, the snarls of beings grappling with one another who have the jealous mindset of the realm of asuras, and so forth. The person whose faith has attained this depth can also entirely comprehend all the words uttered by those who have the mindsets of heavenly beings, as well as the words of monks, nuns, and bodhisattvas who are explaining the teachings. The person of this depth of faith can determine which teaching is being taught, for whom it was originally taught, and its merits. Lastly, in the verse at the end of this section of the chapter, the Buddha tells us that the bodhisattvas who have attained these merits will also attain the following ability. The greatly sacred and honored Buddhas, the teachers and transformers of living beings, elucidate the sublime Dharma in the midst of great assemblies, and those who uphold this Dharma Flower Sutra can completely hear them all. Since the Lotus Sutra contains the entire body of the Tathagata, people who uphold it are naturally able to hear whatever teachings the Tathagata gives. Furthermore, in the passage of verse in the text of the sutra that describes the merits of the ear, there are two more important statements. First are the lines, "They can hear the sounds of pure and lovely songs, without forming attachments to them." And second are these qualifying words, "And these upholders can completely hear all the sounds and voices, without harming their sense faculty of hearing." The first expression means that even if teachers of the Dharma are charmed by music or singing, and find them beautiful and pleasing, they form no permanent attachments to them, nor do they become so preoccupied with them that they are lulled into neglecting the things in their lives that are important. Their example also provides a good caution in regard to forms of entertainment. The phrase, "without harming their sense faculty of hearing," tells us that the ears of the teacher of the Dharma will not be damaged despite hearing all the sounds of the 3,000 great thousandfold world. This means they will not be thrown into emotional confusion by the different kinds of sounds in the world. If ordinary people hear agonized shrieks of distress and suffering coming from one side, and then snarling disputes and angry quarrels coming from the other, their emotions will end up becoming entangled with those sounds, muddling their minds. Those who have sufficiently deepened their faith, however, will not become overwhelmed. Instead, they will stay, in the sutra's words, right where they are. That is to say, they will hear those sounds with a mind that is completely composed. The merits of the nose, tongue, and body. The Buddha next describes the merits of the nose. Of all the human being's 5 senses, the sense of smell is the most animalistic, and for this reason, it is said that the arts of smell have not developed to the same extent as those associated with vision, such as painting and sculpture, and those related to the auditory sense, primarily music. But for this very reason, the sense of smell has a direct influence on human emotions. When we smell an unpleasant odor, we may lose our appetite or get a headache, or conversely, we may become completely fascinated by a delightful aroma. It is very difficult to get a palpable sense of the merits of the nose that are explained in the sutra, but people who improve their performance of the 5 practices of Dharma teachers will discern things perfectly by smell with no impediments. Essentially, these merits are nothing short of the ability to clearly grasp the ultimate reality of all things. The merits of the tongue come next in the sequence. These merits are of 2 types. First, whatever teachers of the Dharma taste with their purified tongues will have an exquisite flavor. When teachers of the Dharma have attained this intensity of faith and stillness within their hearts, whatever they eat will naturally taste delicious. Second, whenever they teach the Dharma, their voice will resound with such profundity and wonder that their words will easily unlock the hearts of listeners, bringing them pleasure and moving them to joy. The Buddha then explains the merits of the body. Anyone who regularly performs the 5 practices of Dharma teachers will obtain a pure crystalline body that reflects the ultimate reality of all things in the world for living beings to see. People who single-mindedly undertake bodhisattva practices are free of the false notion of self, and this purity allows them to reflect within themselves the images of all phenomena in the world exactly as they really are, with no distortion or obscurity. Thus, as the sutra's words, "all living beings will delight to see them," describe, all people will look up to those who possess these merits as esteemed teachers, and the mere sight of them will bring joy to people's hearts. The merits of the mind. Next are the merits of the mind. Anyone who undertakes the 5 practices of Dharma teachers will obtain 1,200 merits of the mind. Here again, I quote directly from the text of the sutra. Shakyamuni Buddha tells the living beings in the assembly, with his pure sense faculty of thinking, on hearing any single verse or any single phrase, they will thoroughly comprehend infinite and boundless meanings. Having discerned those meanings, they will be able to elucidate that single phrase or verse for a month, 4 months, or even a year. The teachings they expound, following any direction and meaning, are never contrary to ultimate reality. As the people who have received these merits have become completely tranquil and pure from the innermost depths of their minds, the sense faculty of the mind, on hearing even a single verse or phrase of the Buddha's teachings, they will immediately penetrate the immeasurable and boundless meanings contained therein. And having understood their countless meanings, those who possess the merits of the mind are able to explain the teachings of that single verse or phrase and elaborate on them for a month, 4 months, or even a year. Having comprehensively mastered those teachings, the teacher of the Dharma can explain them in all their aspects, in a multitude of ways, and at whatever length necessary. This truth reveals the vast breadth of the Buddha Dharma, and the deep wisdom of those who have gained complete mastery of it. The Buddha next tells the assembly, if the Dharma teachers talk about secular texts, governance, means of livelihood, and so forth, all will be in accord with the true Dharma. These words are especially significant from the standpoint of the real problems we face in our everyday lives. The term secular texts refers to books other than religious works that provide guidance for living our lives, such as those dealing with ethics and philosophy. But in fact, its meaning here is not limited to books, but applies equally to verbal instruction. Consequently, we can understand the phrase secular texts to broadly mean the ideas of ethics and philosophy and secular knowledge for living daily life. Speaking about governance encompasses talking about such matters as politics, economics, and law, whereas speaking about livelihood entails discussing agriculture, engineering, or commerce with others, or instructing them on such subjects. When those who have attained this depth of faith speak about the practical matters of daily life, their ideas will naturally accord with the true Dharma of the Buddha's teachings. The proper path for religious specialists is to restrict themselves to speaking about spiritual problems and the realm of the heart. It is best to refrain from touching directly on political issues and a nation's foreign policy, but religious specialists do indeed have an important role in teaching what should be our fundamental attitude towards these issues. As Shakyamuni gave his followers instructions on their livelihoods, economics, and other practical matters, he naturally also expounded the basic guidelines for those engaged in the art of governance. The majority of people who have faith in the Lotus Sutra are not clerics but lay people. For this reason, when sharing the Buddha's teachings as they pertain to our lives, teachers of the Dharma sometimes expound secular texts, speaking about the practical ideas of ethics and philosophies of life. And at other times, Dharma teachers may describe things such as the basic principles of proper governance. Because Buddhists apply the Dharma in a practical way in their daily lives, it is even more necessary for Dharma teachers to frequently discuss Buddhist approaches to people's means of livelihood. These sorts of discussions about the practical matters of life are deeply entangled with people's vested interests, and one way or another, our egos are apt to assert themselves strongly. When this happens, our impulse is to see things short-sightedly, or to selfishly want everything our way, and often we cannot adopt the kind of broader perspective that is necessary to benefit both ourselves and others. On the other hand, the person who has attained true faith approaches things from the Buddha's perspective, thinking about everything from the standpoint of benefiting all living beings, so that what they impart naturally coincides with the Buddha's teachings. This quality is especially important in the social conditions of contemporary society. In order to explain this in greater detail, the Buddha further elaborates in the text of the sutra as follows. The Dharma teacher will entirely know the workings of the minds, the movements of the minds, and the fruitless theories occupying the minds of living beings in the 6 realms of existence, in the 3,000 great thousandfold world. Though these people have not yet attained undefiled wisdom, such will be the purity of their sense faculty of thinking, that their thoughts, deliberations, and speech will be the same as the Buddha Dharma, entirely without falsehood, and in accord with what has been taught in sutras by Buddhas of the past. The Buddha is telling us that wherever living beings are in the world, whatever they may feel in their hearts, however their minds move, and no matter how pointless the frivolous arguments that occupy their thoughts may be, a person who has attained this deeper level of faith can perceive it all. They can know all things because, although they have not yet attained the undefiled wisdom that is perfectly free from delusion and perceives the ultimate reality of all things, the innermost depths of their mind have become pure enough to gain such transcendent powers. Whatever these Dharma teachers think about or consider, whatever they discern or ponder, and whatever they teach to people will be in accord with the Buddha Dharma. Every single utterance will be truth, and will also agree with the teachings given by all the Buddhas in the past. The sutra's phrase, Buddhas of the past, refers to the many Buddhas of the ages prior to Shakyamuni Buddha's appearance in the world. This is a way of saying that the Dharma discovered by Shakyamuni Buddha is the ever-present truth of every age, and thus what the person who has reached the inner depths of faith teaches to others will always coincide with the truth that is common to the past, present, and future. This is how the Buddha explains the merits of purifying the 6 sense faculties of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind by performing the 5 practices of Dharma teachers. In conclusion, let's consider the purposes of the Buddha's exposition in this chapter, of which there are 2. The first is to encourage people to devote themselves to practicing with single-minded intent, because if they truly carry out the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, they can attain the kinds of elevated states of both mind and body that are the merits described in this chapter. Second, a true practitioner of the Lotus Sutra must undertake the important role of sharing the Buddha Dharma with others, so it is necessary for them to obtain these kinds of lofty states of mind and body, because the powers they bring allow bodhisattvas to perceive all things in their clarity. All practitioners of the Lotus Sutra who have not attained this level should know that their practice is still lacking. They must constantly reflect on themselves so as to avoid falling into complacency and conceit. Bringing us to realize these 2 points is the Buddha's intention in this chapter.